Hi, and welcome to the session on integrating Spira with Jira and Microsoft Azure DevOps. My name's Adam Sandman, and I'll be the presenter today of this session. What we'll be doing today is learning about how you can set up Spira to integrate with both Jira and Microsoft Azure DevOps, which allows you to synchronize defects and user stories between the two different systems. I'll first be doing a session on the setup, and then we'll see a live demonstration of how you can synchronize defects and user stories between the different systems. Although we'll be focusing primarily on DevOps and Jira, the principles are also applicable to other bug tracking and project management tools that you would like to synchronize with Spira. Before we get into that, a little bit of background. As you know, one of the company's key values here at Inflectra is the idea of harmony. We want to make sure there is harmony in software development and software testing. And one of the key ways we do that is to provide harmony across ecosystems. So many of our customers who are using Spira Test or Spira Team or Spira Plan are also using other tools. For example, Atlassian Jira and Microsoft Azure DevOps, also known formally as Team Foundation Server or TFS. Other customers of ours are also using other tools like ServiceNow, GitLab, GitHub, open source products like Bugzilla, Redmine, and therefore Spira does come with a built-in data synchronization system designed to synchronize primarily defects or incidents or bugs across the different systems, and also to synchronize and mostly import in user stories and requirements from different systems as well. In this presentation, as I mentioned, we'll be focusing primarily on Atlassian Jira and Microsoft Azure DevOps, but conceptually, Spira will integrate with any of those different tools. And you can also have different projects in your environment synchronized with different tools as well. So you can have some projects use Jira and some use, for example, Azure DevOps in this example. Now, Spira does have over 60 different integrations. So though we're only focusing on 2 today, that's only a small part of a much larger ecosystem. Spira comes with 60 different plugins that will let you connect to different tools, everything from IDEs, unit test frameworks like JUnit, CI tools like Jenkins, various bug tracking and project management tools that we'll be talking about today, also modeling tools like Spark's Enterprise Architect, functional testing tools like Selenium or Test Complete, as source code management like Subversion and Git, and performance testing tools like Neoload. So please feel free to explore the ecosystem and all the integrations after this session. So the question is, why did we focus today on Jira and Microsoft ADO, aka Azure DevOps? Well, we do integrate with those different tools that I mentioned on the previous slide, but if you look at the number of support tickets we get, the number of sales inquiries we get, by far the most popular are typically Atlassian Jira and Microsoft Azure DevOps. And traditionally, Jira was the number one number of inquiries we got, and that was nothing else was even close to it. In the last year or so, since Microsoft's revamped TFS to ADO or Azure DevOps, we've seen a lot more inquiries come in. The other tools that have become quite popular are also GitLab and GitHub. Of course, GitHub was bought by Microsoft. So when that happened, GitLab has become very popular as well. So we do integrate with those as well. So how does data synchronization work? I'll be showing it to you live in the application after the slides, but before we do that, I think it's worth giving a little bit of an overview to see how it works in concept. So, as I mentioned, the idea is Spira Test, Team, or Plan acts as your hub to all these different tools. So all those different tools use our data synchronization framework and can synchronize their requirements and defects with Spira. And different projects can use the different tools. So you can have one project using Jira, one project using GitLab, one project using Azure DevOps, one project using ServiceNow. So that way it becomes a centralized hub. And then you can use our program and portfolio views to view the progress and status of all the work going on and view the issues and the requirements across all of the different products in that program. Now, the way the systems work is a little bit different. So first of all, when it comes to Jira, we can synchronize the defects that we call incidents and they call issues. We can synchronize those bidirectionally. So you can raise a new incident in Spira, and it will get, for example, during testing, and that will then get logged into Jira. You can then make an update in Jira, and then it will update back in Spira. So for example, you run tests, you fail the test, you log a bug, the team in Jira fixes the bug, the person in Spira can then view it and retest it, and then the person in Jira will then fix it again, and then ultimately the person in Spira can then close it, hopefully. Similarly for user stories, the person in Jira can write the user stories, they come into Spira as requirements, the person in Spira can then write the test cases to go with those user stories, and then run the test cases. With Azure DevOps, the defects work the same way, except they call them work items rather than issues, and the user stories can come in the same way as well. One difference also with TFS or DevOps is we can also synchronize tasks, and that's really relevant for Spira Team or Spira Plan only. We also have a very flexible data synchronization system. It supports multiple different use cases. For example, you can have Spira and the external tool, ADO or Jira, both cloud hosted. If you do that, it's very, very simple. All you do is add on the cloud synchronization service to your subscription, like we do in the screenshots shown here. And once you do that, our cloud service will automatically synchronize the Spira cloud with either Jira Cloud or ADO Cloud. We take care of all of it for you. If Spira is on-premise, then Spira comes with a built-in synchronization service that you can use to connect to Spira and the external system. So there's a Windows service that runs with Spira, and it will take care of everything for you. And that's when Spira is on-premise, and the other tool, Jira or ADO, it can be either the server version or the cloud version. It's immaterial. And then the last combination, which is less common, but we do have some customers in this situation, that's when you have Spira in our cloud. So you're using the cloud version of Spira from an Inflectra URL, we're hosting it for you. But the external system, in this case Jira or TFS or ADO, is installed as a server. So it's Jira server and it's Azure DevOps server, or formerly known as Team Foundation server. In that case, we don't want to be sending data through your firewall. So what we do is we have a special add-on called the desktop data synchronization tool that sits inside your firewall. It installs locally, and it goes out and connects to our cloud and connects inside your firewall to the external tool. So that way, there's no need to open up any firewall ports, which makes your IT group very unhappy and gives them heartburn. The great thing is they don't have to do that. You run the desktop data sync tool inside your network, and it goes out to our cloud to do all the communication. So those are three options, basically, depending on if Spira is cloud hosted or on server, or if Jira or ADO are cloud hosted or on server. Oh, and by the way, you could even integrate with the desktop data sync. We have some clients that integrate with both cloud and desktop server versions of, say, Jira or ADO at the same time. So one project uses the ADO server, and the other project uses the ADO cloud. Another company is doing it where they have some projects on Jira server and some on Jira cloud. So you can do that also. So that's the PowerPoint. Let's hop over here to the live applications. So over here we have the data synchronization service inside of Spira. We've got a special instance we set up for this today. Now bear in mind, we have 4 different plugins listed here. So we've set this up ahead of time. So, and for today's demonstration, we're going to be using the cloud synchronization service. So these plugins are being synchronized seamlessly in our cloud. We're not doing anything on the server to require that. So if you are using the desktop data sync or the Windows service, that part you'll need to set up separately before this. But other than that, the configuration is identical. And here you can see we've got 4 different plugins available. We've installed GitHub, GitLab, Jira, and Azure DevOps. We're going to be focusing solely today on the Jira and Azure DevOps versions. You may ask me, how do I set this all up? Well, don't worry. If you go to Spira Docs, that's our centralized documentation platform, you can go to integrations, and there's separate sections on Jira Cloud, Jira Server, and Azure DevOps. With Jira Cloud and Server, we've separated into 2 different ones because they've changed it quite a lot on the Atlassian side, so they are a little bit different to set up. Azure DevOps, the UI from the Microsoft side is actually very, very, very similar, so we have it under one section, so it's a little bit easier. Okay, so what do you do to set these up? Well, we'll do them one at a time, and again, you can refer back to the documentation here at any time to see what I've done. I'm not going to refer to that, I'm just going to show you live in our application. So first of all, each of the plugins has a global set of configuration that you get to by hitting the edit button. that configures the plugin itself. You can also then configure the plugin on a per project within Spira basis. So that the Jira demo project we have in our navigation here, we've got one project for each of the different plugins, Jira, GitHub, and so on. And then Azure DevOps. So each of these projects is synchronizing with a different tool. So the global setting is done here. And then once you've done that, you can choose the project and go to the project specific settings. So the first thing you do is you either add the plugin if it's missing, or you hit the edit plugin if it's already in your system. So let's do Jira first. So for Jira, the name should always be Jira Data Sync, written just like that. And it says that here. The caption, that can be anything you like. It's just used to display it to you, the user. However, if you've got more than one Jira, you probably want to give it a different name, like my Jira, client Jira, whatever it is, whatever makes sense to you and your users. If you only have a single Jira instance, just call it Jira, and it makes it simple. Next, you have the URL to connect to the Jira instance. This is a cloud instance, so we're using the Atlassian.net URL. We use then a login and a password. Now, depending on what you're connecting to, it's different. If it's the cloud version of Jira, you're going to put the login and the API key, not the password. If it's the server version of Jira, you can use the password. Time offset, this is interesting. Normally, you can leave this at 0. This is telling Spira how long to look back. Normally, with the synchronization runs every 2 minutes, so Spira looks back just 2 minutes and says, what's changed in the last 2 minutes? If you've got a situation where there's a time zone difference between Jira and Spira, or your server's lagging slightly, the time zone difference is a few minutes off, you could add a time offset. So if you ever find items are not synchronizing, for example, you make a change and it doesn't get picked up, try increasing this value to 1 or 2 or even 8 hours. The only downside is it increases the look back value, but apart from that, there's no real downside for doing that. Auto map users, that's if you want to use the same logins and login names in both Jira and in Spira. If you do, you don't need to map the users. You can just use auto map users. With the cloud version of Jira, you have to usually map to the Atlassian ID because most people's user profiles are private. So usually for Jira Cloud, you're going to want to say no. For Jira Server, when you can control the logins more clearly, you choose yes. For the other values here, I will refer you to the plugin configuration. Choose Jira Cloud or Jira Server. Go to configure the plugin, and it describes here what those custom 1, custom 2, custom 3, custom 4, and custom 5 mean. The only ones that we think are important for the demo today will be custom 4. That means which of your Jira issues do you want to have, issue types, do you want to be treated as requirements? So we're going to choose user story and epic to be requirements. Everything else is going to be a defect or an incident. And custom 5, that's where you show what's related, meaning that when you create an issue in Spira and you link it to another issue, we can create that link in Jira for you automatically. Jira does require a verb, and by default, most Jira instances will use the verb related as the default, so the word related is appropriate. If you leave that blank, everything will work fine, except that any defects in Spira linked to other defects, we won't automatically populate the defect relationship for you. But apart from that, it's still good. Okay, so that's the plugin. Next, we have to then go to the project mapping. So for each project in Jira, you have the different projects. So let's go back into data synchronization over here. And we go choose the Jira project, Jira demo project, and choose the arrow. And that takes us to the mapping page. So I've told this particular system that I'm going to integrate this project name, Jira demo project, with demo. That's the project key. In Jira, that's the prefix that they use for the defects. Okay, you choose active as yes, hit save, and that tells Spira that I'm going to synchronize this project with that specific project in Jira. The next thing I have to do is map some of the values. Okay, now you can map a bunch of different fields. The ones you'll need to set up will be, at the very least, set up the status and the types. So in Spira, you can have different workflows and you can have different incident types. So and different incident statuses. These are the statuses. We've mapped these to the equivalent IDs in Jira. So new is new, close is close, and so on. These ID values you can get from Jira. For Jira Server, they come out of the database. For Jira Cloud, it's obviously you can't see them because there's no database access. So instead, we have a helpful tool for Jira Cloud called the configuration helper. And the configuration helper is a tool you download from our website. It looks like this. And you put in the login and password, and it will show you all of the types, and it will show you all of the statuses. And you can use that like this to see all the ID values. So you don't have to worry about guessing. You can just connect to your project in Jira. You can then see the issue types, issue statuses, priorities, releases, components, all of that stuff. And it's all visible. And that's what you'll use in the configuration. So those ID values are going to come from the Jira configuration helper. So we already filled these in with the ID values. These are the IDs of my different statuses. If I go back a second, I can do the same thing for the types. We've configured bug and task only. The others we're not going to be using today, so they're marked as inactive, so don't worry about those. Those are the only fields you have to set up. Now, depending on what your Jira is going to require, any field that your Jira instance requires to log a defect or an issue, you will need to map in Spira. Otherwise, Jira will reject it and throw it in the logs. So if, for example, your instance also requires a component, then you'll need to put the IDs of the components. And Spira has components just like Jira does. Similarly, if you require a priority for your bugs to be logged in Jira, you'll need to map the bugs. And again, these are all ID values, they're not the names. Finally, if you have any custom fields in Spira and Jira you want to synchronize, you can do that also. With the custom fields, we haven't mapped this one. You'll put in the external key, which is the ID of the custom field. So it might be field 1001. And then for the values, you actually choose the name. So that's one difference. For most things, we use the ID in Jira. So for the field ID, the standard fields, the one case that's different is for custom values, you actually use the display name. So it's in the documentation, but that does trip some people up. And B, it's very important to match the types. If the custom field in Jira is a multi-select list, you need to make the custom property in Spira multi-select. If Jira is a single select, make it single select. If it's text, make it text. They need to be the same types or it won't work. That's really important. That's how defects get mapped. If you want to map requirements, if you're doing that also, it works exactly the same way. You map components with the same with ID values. You map any custom fields. You can map the priorities that we call importances. And you can also map the types as well, so that user stories can come in different to, for example, features. Once all the mapping has been done, that's great. You are now all set. You can now start to log defects in Spira, and they should appear in Jira. So how do we do that? Great question. Go into the incident tracker. We can actually just log a defect. But actually, if you think about it, the most common use case is to run a test. So I can log a defect here and it will synchronize. Great. But actually, for today's demo, I'm going to show you a bit more of a realistic example. I'm going to run a test case. So I'm going to run a test case over here. And it's going to be creating a new book and creating a new author. Let's run these two test cases. We can use a test set obviously as well. I'm going to choose the release. Version 1 is fine. Hit next. And we'll go to this screen by screen. So let's pretend we're running a test case. We're going to pass the first two steps. When we get to the third step, we'll pretend we get an error message. So click on the submit button, page missing error displayed instead. That was the actual result. So we need a page not found error. So let's just go and manufacture one. Oh, there's a page not found error. I'm taking a screenshot. I'm pasting it in. I go to the defect tab or incident tab, and I'm going to say, missing page error on submit. Priority is high. Component is component 1. The Jira ID is blank. That's correct, because that will be filled in by the synchronization system. We hit fail. Defect is logged. And the test has failed. The next test is being run. We can't run that one because there's a failure on the previous one. So we'll just say, blocked by failure. Hit blocked. We're done. Hit finish. Very good. we now have the test results run today. If we go to our failure, there's our test run. Click on the test run. There's our test result. We click first 2 steps passed, third step failed. There's our link to our defect. Okay, let's go to our defect. So there's our defect. It's got the name, description, the screenshots embedded. We've got the attachment, which is the screenshot right here. And the Jira ID is currently blank. Okay, that's to be expected. We'll come back to that. The synchronization runs all the time, running in the background. So it's still running. Let's go here to synchronization. And if I refresh that, you'll see it's going to run in a few minutes. It runs every couple of minutes. So once it runs, it will pick up that new defect. We can also, of course, log a defect in Jira, and it will also appear in Spira. Also, we can log a user story and have that come in. Oh, it's actually synchronized. Look at that. Great. So it's been synchronized. You know it's synchronized because the defect gets a Jira ID automatically, so we can refer to it. If you go to the attachments panel, and you will also have a hyperlink to the Atlassian URL for the same item. So if I control click on it, it comes up here, and guess what? Here is our issue we just logged in Jira. The description, expected result, actual result, and steps and all that are pre-populated. The screenshot is here, and there's hyperlinks back to the original requirements and defects in Spira. So we have those links automatically, which is nice. Let's go ahead and fix that bug. So the use case might be, let's go ahead and fix it. So we'll say done, and we'll say fixed using patch 123, something like that. Hit save. Great, we've now fixed the defect. Since we're in Jira, we'll use this at the same time to create a new user story. So that's the project we want. User story, system needs to be able to do auto backups. It's our new user story. That's component 2. As an admin, I would like to be able to back up and restore my data seamlessly. Create my story. That's it. If we go into my board, you'll see all the issues. You can see it right here. There it is. Right now, it's not in Spira yet. Once it is, it will have a hyperlink. Because if you go into this one, the bug we just closed, you notice we have the hyperlinks. So in the same way that we add the ID to Spira and the hyperlink, we also add the hyperlinks to Jira, and that's how you'll know that the item has been synchronized. If we go back over here into Spira, we can look in the requirements section. And Spira also has a board view. I'll go to the sortable list view just to make it easier to find things. And we'll sort by most recent. And hasn't come in yet. No, that's a different one. And we'll look at our defect. Oh, and that I think has already changed to closed. That's already synchronized. So the status changed from new to closed. You can see that in the log right here, new to closed. So we do track that. Email notification even about it. And you can see that it was done by the DataSync user. So that's really important. From a traceability standpoint, you can always see what the DataSync user is doing because that's the user that will be in the history. And you can see here the comment that I created in Jira is already added. If we go over to requirements, hasn't come in yet. When it does, it will appear there. So that's how you would log a defect in Spira, have it come into Spira, and how you can then also create a new user story in Jira, and it will come into Spira. While we're waiting for that to happen, we can go ahead and look at Microsoft Azure DevOps, and we'll come back to this. So let's look here at Microsoft Azure DevOps. Okay, the setup is also described in SpiraDoc. So go to SpiraDoc, go to Azure DevOps, edit plugin. If you go here, you can see that's the name of the plugin. It should now we do use the name that it used to be called for the physical name. It's called MSTFS Data Sync, and that's important. That's the system name. So you need to use that. That's how it knows which plugin to use, MSTFS Data Sync. Now the caption can be anything you like. So I've called it Azure DevOps because obviously that's the new name that Microsoft is using, and they'll probably change their name again because it keeps changing from TFS to Team Foundation Services to Visual Studio Team System. So it'll change again. So change the caption, but leave the name as is. And this describes where it is. That's our URL they're hosting it. Now the connection is going to be the appropriate URL. The URL format is a little bit different if it's Visual Studio Online or if it's Azure DevOps or if it's TFS on-premise. But basically it's the URL you connect to it with. You use a login. And for the password, if it's an on-premise installation, you use the password. And customer one would have your Windows domain. Since this is a cloud version, we don't need that. And the password is not the password, it's actually your personal access token. So make sure you use that. The rest of the custom 1 through 5s are all documented right here, and you can decide how you want the system to operate. They change the behavior slightly, but they're all described here. For today's demonstration, the only one that we've needed to set is we want to tell the system which particular work item types in TFS or ADO we want to consider user stories, epics, and features. We want them all to come in as requirements. So like Jira, if we don't specify, it comes in as a bug. If we do specify, it comes in as a requirement. Okay. Meanwhile, we're waiting. There we go. While we're waiting, the new user story did come in from Jira. It's right over here. Perfect. This means to be able to do auto backups. There's the description. Perfect. Hyperlink back to Jira. So that does work nicely. But now we're on to Azure DevOps. Okay. Azure DevOps. How does that work? Well, it works in a very similar way. You set up the plugin. That's the global configuration. Go back to Synchronization Home. You now choose a different project. It's the Azure DevOps demo project. Choose that. Click on the arrow to go to the project-specific settings. And just like we had for Jira, you choose the name of the project in the other tool. Now, in this case, we don't use the key like we would do in Jira. It's actually the display name. It's actually the name that's written out. It's a little bit different. Hit save, hit active. Okay. Just like we did with Spira, you need to configure some of the fields. And like we do with Jira, there are both the standard fields that you can configure and the custom properties. Let's look at these. So for the standard fields, the type and the status are the two ones you have to do. And TFS is a bit different to Jira because we don't use the ID values, we use the name values. And with Azure DevOps or TFS, you can either map the statuses in Spira to what's called the state, just active, or you can map it to what's called the state plus the reason. ADO has both a high-level status they call a state and a lower-level status they call the reason. So something might be open because it's open, but it also might be open because it's been approved and open. Similarly, it might be closed because it's been fixed, but it might be closed because it's been not reproduced. So ADO does have a high-level and low-level status. And you can also add custom statuses which don't have low-level statuses. So depending on what you're using, you can either map these the instance statuses in Spira to just the high-level one or to the high-level plus the low-level. You use the plus symbol to combine the two if you're going to map to the low-level detailed status. Okay, for the incident types, we only actually have bug and issue in our TFS or ADO, so that's what we'll be using. Those are the types you can map to for the incidents. For the priorities, we've mapped them to the priorities inside of ADO as well. And these are actually the display names, not the IDs. And then the other thing we did is a component we're not using with ADO, even though we've mapped them, it doesn't actually use that. What we do actually is use the area. ADO has what's called the area, which is a hierarchical field that's like the part of the system. And so you can map the areas in TFS or ADO to the custom field. So area gets mapped to a custom field like this. And this is the path to the area in ADO. If you use ADO, you'll recognize this path structure. It's like a structure, it's a hierarchical field that describes the different areas of your system. And you can have the core system, the submodule, the submodule, the submodule, and so it's a hierarchy. And then we just mirror that with a slash. So that's how you map up the incidents. Now for the requirements, you do the same thing. You can map areas. We didn't do areas, but you can map areas as well. The priorities, which we call the importance field. The types get mapped. In this case, we have user story, feature, and epic, which map to the ones in Spira. And the other thing is the status. Now the status for the requirements is a bit different. Because it's a one-way synchronization, we don't need to map to the lower level status. So for requirements, we only map to the state. We do not map to the state and the reason. So it's a little bit different. If you get confused, don't worry. It's all described here in the documentation. But basically, for ADO/TFS, we map the requirements to the state. For the instance, we can map it to the state only or the state plus reason. That's all the mapping. Once that's done, which is done, we can now use it. So let's go into our ADO project and go to incidents. And that's where we'll see the incidents. And when we go into requirements, we'll see the requirements. And just like we did for the test cases, for Jira, I'm going to use a test case rather than just running a bug, because that gives you a more realistic feel. So we're going to run the test case. And we're going to log a bug. And we got our 404 over here, which is really handy. So I'll take a screenshot again, and we'll go into and we choose these are the iterations that are in TFS. So I'll choose the iteration, hit next, and let's pass the first step, passed OK. Second step, click on the login button, failed with missing page. We'll do that again. So print that in, go to incidents, missing page on login. That's my bug. That's a bug. That's high. Fine, login and login. Okay, and again, the Azure DevOps ID is blank because it's a new issue. And we're going to hit fail. That fails it. Go back over here. And there we go. That's it. So there's our test result. We'll click on that. We can go to our test run, which is right here. There's our failure, step 2. There's our defect. Click on that, go to our defect. Oh, and that's already synchronized. It runs every 2 minutes, and we just happen to have done it right before, so there we go. There's the DevOps ID, so it populates that just like it will populate it for Jira. Let's go into associations. In associations, you can see the link to the results, the test result and the requirement. If we go to attachments, we can see the link now to Azure DevOps, just like we'd see with Jira, but instead of it being the Jira URL, it's now the Azure DevOps URL. So let's click on that. And this is now the exact same bug in ADO. And again, login, expected result, actual result, test results. And we do have the attachment. If you go over here to the attachments, there's our screenshot right here. If you go to our hyperlinks, there's our link back to Spira. So you can go to the original defect. And like we did before, let's go ahead and resolve it. So what we do is we go to the state. This is where you have the state, which is the high level status, and the low level, which is the reason. So we're going to fix it. And we're going to add a comment. Fixed using patch 123. We'll do the same thing as in Jira. Hit save. That's done. And like we did in Jira, we'll go to the work items and we're going to log a new user story. So let's go here. New work item. New user story. System needs to be able to work on IE 11. That's a new user story. And description, the system needs to work on IE 11. Those criteria, it works. And I think that's all we need. Priority, yep, so that's all set. Hit save. And that's our user story. Great. So now let's go back in to Spira. Go back to our incident view. And again, like we had before, we've got a grid view. We've also got a Kanban board view if you want as well. So we can also see things in a Kanban board or a grid. And there's my defect. If I click on it, that's still listed as new. Nothing yet. When it synchronizes, it will update that. So let's go into requirements. Nothing yet. That's from before. We can even show the creation date just to verify. Yeah, that's not from today. So as it synchronizes, it will come over. So we go over here to data synchronization, and you can always just watch and see when it's running. 4:45, so it's going to run in a few minutes. So once it runs, that will appear. And in Spira, we do have different views as well, just like we saw before for the defects. We can also see the requirements coming in as a board, as a Kanban board. You can see it as a sortable list, a hierarchy, whatever makes sense. There's different views in Spira for the same thing. Now, that's the synchronization running. Now, let's suppose you run into an issue. What happens? Suppose something doesn't synchronize. What do you do for troubleshooting? Well, we have some knowledge-based articles on our website to do with that. But the synchronization typically runs every 2 or 3 minutes. And if you run into any issues, that's where you would go to the view errors. And that will show you any synchronization issues that you're running into. And if you look here, it will list the tool that's being synchronized. So in this case, these are to do with GitLab. And these are warnings. Warnings mean that it wasn't able to synchronize a certain item because maybe it wasn't mapped correctly or something wasn't set up properly. But a warning doesn't prevent the synchronization happening. It just means certain data elements might not be synchronized fully, like some fields might be blank. Errors are more serious. If you see an error, you need to investigate it. An error usually means something was not available. An error means something won't synchronize. If there's an error in the log, that will explain why something doesn't appear that you expect to appear. In this case, it's actually a service that's unavailable. And if you saw on the previous screen, I think Microsoft had some unavailability of TFS. It was down for a maintenance or something. So if you ever see service 503 unavailable, it looks like that service is offline, especially if it only happens once. If you see it repeatedly happening, then you should raise a ticket with the tool you're connecting with. They could be blocking the API or something. But if you just a one-off connectivity error like that, it probably just means that system was down for some period of time. So for troubleshooting, go to the view error log, and our support team will usually ask you to do that if anything doesn't seem to be working correctly. Oh, while we were talking, good news, the user story has just come in from ADO. There's my user story. System needs to be able to work on IE 11. There you go. There's a description. Go to attachments. There's the hyperlink back to TFS or ADO. Exactly was the same thing as when we sent it from Spira. If we go into our incident, and go to missing page on login, it's switched to resolved. It was previously, if you remember, in the new status. It's now been marked as resolved because CFS updated it. And if you go down here, there's the message fixed using patch 123. And in the history, you can see the changes. So that's synchronized. So just to recap, we logged in both ADO and in Jira, we logged a new issue during testing that the defect went across to ADO and to Jira. In both systems, we updated the issue or the bug to fix it and add a comment. It came back into Spira. We then logged a new user story in both ADO and Jira, and that then came into Spira. And obviously, if we update the user story, it will also update. So we have our systems fully integrated. And again, you can now look at data synchronization, and you can see the different systems integrated like that. And if you go to the program dashboard, which is nice, you can see all of the your different systems, and you can get metrics about the three different systems, in this case, with GitHub as well. You can have in Jira and ADO, and you can see your requirements test coverage. You have a top-down program view. So I don't have to log into ADO or Jira. So if you've got a team where some teams are using ADO, some teams are using Jira, you can get a program-wide view of all the different systems directly from this view. Thank you very much for attending this session. If you have any questions, please write it in the chat window in the conference.